This is the Content Marketing Podcast, episode number 157, Why Quality is the New Black. Hello and welcome to the Content Marketing Podcast. This is the show where we help you attract and retain business through the power of quality content. I'm your host, Rachel Parker of Resonance Content Marketing, and today is January 14th, 2016. Hello, or as we say in Texas, howdy, and thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Content Marketing Podcast. Just a reminder, we're live on iTunes and on Stitcher, so if you're listening to this episode on the blog, you can click on over and subscribe. And if you use a different app for your podcast listening pleasure, we also have an RSS feed, and I will provide that link in the blog post. To learn more about content marketing, I invite you to download our free audio, 5 Things You Must Know About Content Marketing. And you can grab your very own copy at contentmarketingaudio.com. Last week, we looked at one of January's biggest cliches, that is, people resolving to join the gym and get in shape. And we looked at what those folks have in common with content marketers who quit, and how we can steer clear of those caveats. If you happen to miss that episode, feel free to check it out on iTunes or Stitcher or via the RSS feed. This week, we're looking at one thing we must all focus on in 2016, that is quality, and why this is the year to raise the bar for our own content marketing. But first, it's time to check in with our news feed for this week's rundown of news you can use. It was actually a pretty quiet week in the content marketing world, but I did notice an interesting item that came out of all places, the United States Federal Trade Commission. Now, for our international listeners, let me explain. The FTC is the government body that oversees advertising. So they are the folks who are keeping an eye out for deceptive or unfair practices to make sure that you are not making any outrageously false claims in your advertising. Well, the FTC is now turning its attention to sponsored content, also known as native advertising. And they have issued a policy statement on how established consumer protection principles apply to different advertising formats, including these native ads that look like surrounding non-advertising content. And I'm sure you've seen this often. You go to a news site or a site that you would go to for news, and amid the genuine articles that are written by journalists, there is sponsored content that is basically advertising for a company. They have also released, the FTC has also released a document called Native Advertising, a guide for businesses to help marketers understand their new guidelines. Now, for our purposes as marketers, this isn't something we need to be overly concerned about because it mostly applies to the places that are publishing the content. So let's say if your brand creates some sponsored content for Forbes, it needs to be clearly marked as advertising. Well, that's up to Forbes when they put it up there. It's not something that necessarily falls on our shoulders. And of course, we need to make sure that any native advertising we create is truthful and accurate, that we're not making any wild claims about our products, just like in our regular advertising. But, it's worth a look. It's worth becoming aware that these regulations are now out there and that the FTC, it's now on their radar and they're now looking at this kind of thing. And again, for our international listeners, you may find it interesting as well, because I'm sure this is going to become a worldwide phenomenon as native advertising takes more and more of a hold. I'm also happy to see the FTC laying down some rules here, because some of these sites, the lines are being blurred between news and advertising. Actually, there was the last season of South Park had a very prominent storyline about the distinction between news and advertising. So I think it's something we need to be aware of. If you have a moment, go ahead and look over these guidelines and see what the FTC has to say about it. And they actually provide some very good examples of what they're talking about. So I'll go ahead and provide that link for you. Okay, our content hit of the week is an excellent post called How to Consistently Create Remarkable Content. This is written by Kelton Reed over on Copyblogger. Now, we're talking a lot about quality as a differentiator for our brands in 2016. We're going to be talking about that a lot here in just a moment. But the reason I like this post is that for one thing, Kelton points out that successful content marketers, those folks who are consistently producing remarkable content, it doesn't just fall out of their heads. You know, they have methods that help them produce that great content on a regular basis. And he actually shares a few of those methods in this blog post. Very interesting and quite insightful. So I will provide a link to it in the blog post for this episode. Okay, that's it for this week's update. If you stumble across something you think might be of interest to your fellow content marketers, please shoot it on over to us so that we can share. Now it's time for this week's Spotlight segment, Why Quality is the New Black. Last week I was doing my usual cruise around for good information, perusing some of my usual sources, and I came across an article on the Inc. website. It was called 10 Expert Marketing Predictions for 2016. Now at this point, I am about up to my eyeballs in 2016 predictions, okay? The year has started and I'm over it. So I, kind of rolled my eyes and I was about to click away, but I happened to see that one of those predictions had the heading content marketing, and the expert quoted was none other than Chris Brogan. Now, if you're familiar with Chris Brogan, he is quite the thought leader in the content marketing world. So I did go ahead and give it a glance. And this is what Leonard writes as part of the post. He, that's Chris Brogan, predicts junk content will fall off as people see its failure to convert, unquote. When I saw that, I jumped out of my chair and I said, yes, yes, out of my chair, excuse me, I can't even speak today. Jumped out of my chair and said, yes, 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 thank you, Chris. And this ties in beautifully with my theme for this month, which is quality. And actually, quality is going to be a theme that we come back to throughout the year because it's so important. And I believe that in 2016, quality is going to emerge as the key differentiator that is going to allow some brands to succeed in content marketing while others get lost in the shuffle. You see, I believe that content marketing is arriving at the same place where social media marketing arrived a few years ago. Remember when, this was probably back, 2010, 2011 or so, when a lot of companies first caught on to social media, they first discovered it as a marketing platform, and they did it really, really badly. Remember that? They would either, give it to the intern. It's like, oh, Jennifer knows how Facebook works. We'll let her be our social media person. Or they said, oh, yay, another bullhorn for us to pick up and scream our marketing message. And, as one might predict, they did not get the results they were hoping for because they didn't understand the platform and they weren't delivering that quality communication that people want when they go to places like Facebook. And a lot of those companies did one of two things. Some of them backed up and said, okay, clearly we're not doing this well. We're going to learn from our mistakes and do some research and find out how to do this correctly. Or probably more of them just threw up their hands and said, this stuff doesn't work. We're going to go back to our banner ads and our e-blasts and our cold calling because we know those work, and this clearly does not. And I believe content marketing is arriving at that point, that same point that social media arrived at a couple of years ago. Think about it. When you go onto Facebook, you don't see a lot of those spammy posts anymore. Now, I think Facebook is slowly edging them out, but you're not seeing the all caps, the 15 exclamation points, the buy now, blah, blah, blah. You're not seeing a lot of that anymore. And I think content marketing is arriving at that point because when content marketing first became mainstream, now we all know it's nothing new, right? But right about 2013, when it first started to creep into mainstream marketing, a lot of brands jumped on the bandwagon. And, I can just envision these folks, these CEOs or business owners or maybe even marketing directors. I can just envision them walking out into their bullpens and saying, okay, who here is an English major? Okay, who knows what a blog is and how they work? Hey, Joey, Joey, you write that fantasy football blog, right? Okay, you're now a content marketing person. And I'm being facetious here, but I think a lot of them did not put much more thought than that into adding marketing to their strategy. Either that or they got a spam email from one of these content farms that said, hey, we're going to write your blog post for $5 and jumped on it, not noticing that the email itself was written incorrectly. So these folks, they're just cranking out content just to get something out there. And it's low quality. It's not well written, it's not original, it's not informative, and as a result, it's not really doing anything for them. They're not getting those results that they were looking for when they first got into content marketing. And just like happened with social media, yes, some of these folks are going to realize, hey, we're not doing a very good job of this. Maybe we need to go back to basics and really learn it from the ground up. But some of them, just like as happened with social media, they're going to drop off altogether. They're going to say, this garbage doesn't work. We're going to go back to our banner ads and our cold calling and our e-blasts and all that good stuff. So I think that's why in 2016, quality is going to be a key differentiator. And that's why I'm talking about quality a lot this month, and we'll keep coming back to it as we go throughout the year. And in fact, just this week, I wrote a blog post called, What is Quality Content, Really? Because if we're going to create quality content, we have to know what that is. What does quality content look like? What are the components? Some marketers think content is quality just because everything is spelled right and it's grammatically correct. And no, I mean that's the minimum. Yes, you do need good spelling and grammar, but that's the ante to even get a seat at the poker table, guys. Okay, that's the bare minimum. And true quality content involves so much more than that. It's really a symphony of carefully crafted elements from the topic to the headline to, yes, the writing, which again involves more than good grammar and spelling. And for example, one of my former clients, they decided to part ways with me a couple of months ago. And what happened was they had a new VP. Actually, they had they decided to make their VP of product the head of marketing as well, which don't get me started on that. But this person looked at the line item for resonance's services and said, why are we spending all this money? We can create this stuff in-house. No problem. We got writers here. They're smart. They know our products. And so they parted ways with me. And, I bear them no ill will. I say via con Dios, and I wish them the best of luck. And recently I visited their blog, and I've got to say the content is so obviously being written by an intern. It is so obvious. It's written in this. Now, this is a diehard B2B company. And the blog is being written in this kind of chatty, slangy style that's, it's just not appropriate for this brand's B2B audience. And this brand is going for high-end B2B clients. They're going after the IBMs and the General Electrics and the General Motors, and this blog is just not going to deliver for them. And I can foresee a couple of months down the line saying, well, clearly blogging doesn't work. We're just going to toss it out the window. So really quality, I can't stress that enough. Quality is something we've all got to work on this year, myself included. I'm right along there with you. But why? Why quality? Why do we need to start going the extra mile? Number one is what a recent, very famous slideshow once called the crap factor. And the crap factor has to do with the fact that as more marketers jump on the content marketing bandwagon, the web is just being inundated with low quality content. It's just, it's not good. They haven't selected their topics well. It's not well written. The ideas aren't presented well. It's just not something you read through and say, wow, I'm glad I read that. So by focusing on quality, we can be the exception to the rule. We can be the one who people can always rely on to produce quality content. And that, that trust takes a while to build up, but it is so, it is such an asset. And in thinking about this, I was thinking about my own practices as a content consumer. And, when I look through my Facebook feed or my LinkedIn feed, anytime I see something from a site like ProBlogger, I will at least give it a passing glance. I will at least look at the title and look at the description that they've linked to, because over time I have come to trust ProBlogger to produce quality content that is going to help me do my job better. And if you keep producing quality content, your customers and your prospective customers will look at you the same way. The second reason is that people have a greater appreciation for quality. Now, back when not a whole lot of people were blogging, a really excellent blog post was not that unusual percentage-wise of the entire content out there in the blogosphere. The really good ones, it wasn't that unusual, because the only people who were blogging were people who were really interested in creating quality communications. Well, now that we've got this crap factor going on in the background, people are more appreciative when they find something that is insightful and interesting and relevant to the issues that are on their minds. So people have a greater appreciation. And again, producing quality content on a consistent basis really helps you build up that trust factor. And the third factor that I have not even mentioned yet is Google. Okay, Google is becoming much more sophisticated in its quest to deliver quality content and deliver better search results. For example, I know some anecdotal research. Now, of course, Google's algorithm is locked under probably the same security as Fort Knox, but brands have done some anecdotal research that shows Google does give preference to longer blog posts. Now, that's not to say that all long posts are good quality, but most quality in-depth posts do tend to be on the longer side. So as we look at quality, it's not just this touchy-feely, nice to have, want to serve our audience better, but it's actually feeding the Googlebot with what the Googlebot is searching for. So as we roll into 2016, let's all make a pledge to up our quality game, to look at what we're doing and saying, how can we raise the bar? Now, how can we do that? A good place to start is by deciding what quality means for your audience and for you as a team. And this is worth a meeting. This is worth a brainstorming session where you sit down with your team and say, okay, what does quality look like? Because you can't aim for something if you don't know what that is. You can just say, oh, we're going to focus on quality, but what does that mean? What does that tangibly, what does that do for us? How can I look at a post and saying this is high quality or this is low quality? And it's going to be different for each brand and for each audience. So I would say it's worth maybe a 1.5, 2-hour meeting to sit down with your team and say, okay, how are we going to focus on quality? What are we going to do this year? And then once you've got that established, figure out how you're going to go about your quality control process. Once you've got those standards set, how are you going to ensure that your team is hitting that mark that you set for yourself? Are you going to, for example, appoint a quality editor that's going to review everything before it goes out and make sure you're meeting those standards? Again, the answer is going to be different for every team. And so it's worth time to figure out, okay, how are we going to keep this going? How are we going to keep this bar raised? How are we going to make sure that we keep hitting this mark? Because, it's January and we're all excited and pepped up right now, but sooner or later, come March, April, August, September, we're going to have a lot on our plates between now and then, and it's going to be easy to slack off, and myself included. I include myself in absolutely all of this. So we need to figure out how we're going to keep that going. So I'm going to be sharing some insights with you as this month goes on, and we'll be coming back to this topic throughout the year. So that's my take on why quality is the new black. If you have any questions or want to add to the conversation, I would love to hear from you. And the best way to reach me is to go to our website, resonancecontent.com. You can either contact me directly through the Contact Us form or through one of the many social channels you see listed there. Now it's time for our content marketing tip of the week. I just mentioned that Google has shown at least an anecdotal preference for longer form content, for more in-depth posts that really explore a topic in great detail and great depth. And to get ideas for those long form posts, for that longer form content, one thing you can do is look back at some of the shorter posts you published and see how you can repurpose them as more in-depth posts. So you may have written a 500-word post on a particular topic. You can actually go back to that post and say, okay, how can I expand on this? How can I take this very basic overview and turn it into a very in-depth mainstream media quality article? Can I incorporate some expert opinions? Can I quote some research data that's relevant to the topic? Can I offer some in-depth examples of what I'm talking about? Now, of course, we never want to get into copy and pasting content because we all know Google will savage us for that, right? But you can use those older posts as a foundation. Use it as a basis for those longer form posts. Take what you've done so far and see how you can expand on it, and that will be. And then a lot of the hard work is done, right? I mean, you've got a good topic, you've got the results from that original post, and now you can create a thoughtful, well documented, high quality post that can deliver real results. Okay, campers, that's it for me today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Content Marketing Podcast. If you like what you've heard today, please feel free to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher or via our RSS feed. And if you really like what you've heard, please leave us a quick review in iTunes. Also, if you want to learn more about content marketing, I invite you to download our free resource, 5 Things You Must Know About Content Marketing. You can get your very own copy at contentmarketingaudio.com. As always, I like to leave you with a quote, and today's comes from a tremendous talent and a true creative genius whom we lost earlier this week, talking, of course, about David Bowie. He once said, quote, "I don't know where I'm going from here, but I promise it won't be boring," unquote. Rest in peace, David Bowie. Again, this is Rachel Parker with Resonance Content Marketing. Thank you again for listening, and we will see you again next week. Take care.